people who have experienced trauma often have no idea how many others have as well.
That seems to be really true.
Who appear to them to be fully undamaged.
I've heard that about churches sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
You know, they'll be like, everybody here is perfect and has never struggled with anything in their
I am
entire
the
life.
only one. No. And even if your story is harder than every other person in your congregation, it's not harder than the story that Christ lived. It just isn't.
Met a ghost of a king on the road when I first fell. Fire burning to my knees I fell. Met a ghost of a king on the road.
A couple different questions here, but I thought perhaps we'd start with something you were touching on a moment ago. But you were talking about how...
A mere moment ago, and something completely other than this podcast.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
The Irish folks who ended up rooting for...
The Nazis?
The Nazis, the Third Reich.
Yeah.
And how this is stemming from a reader question about trauma and resistance to suffering and what it can do. And my question, can you tell a little bit more about those Irish folks who end up coming into the wrong side of the World War II conflict? Because I can get to our question on trauma, but I think sometimes we have such a modern perspective on
it's pretty simple.
stuff
It's just
happening.
the enemy of my enemy is, my friend. So the British hate the Nazis, the Irish hate the British. So
it all works out.
therefore, we must be on the same team. It's a pretty easy logic that gets us there.
Yeah.
We do this now when somebody's like joining the conservative movement, like here we come, we're going to join the conservative movement. And you have to be ready to say, we don't want you, actually.
Yeah.
We don't need Knickerbricks, black dwarves. Mm-hmm. We don't need him to bring all the ghouls and the hags and so on. We can do this without them.
Those kind of assumptions are always rely on a flawed human math, right?
Yeah.
Like we can't win without.
Yeah, pragmatism to a fault.
Yeah.
So like this will help us win the day, as opposed to this will help us win the day and turn into our enemy. But at least we'll have won.
But we'll have won.
Yeah.
We'll have replaced Sauron with Galadriel.
Yeah, we'll have an all-seeing female eye.
Right.
Be much better.
Yeah. But okay, so following up from this question, this person's asking, she's wondering about how to take terrible situations from childhood. Again, I don't know the details. She didn't share them. I'm glad. Take terrible situations and turn a profit on it. And she says that there's not much in the Reformed world about how to do that. And that's kind of my question. I think that's sort of storytelling.
I'm curious why she would think there's not much in the Reformed world, but
to me, it seems like that is what the Reformed world brings, is an understanding of providence.
Understanding that God is crafting you, shaping you into something.
That these aren't happening outside of his control, things that happen.
Right. It can be terrible. It can be a result of the fall. It can be traumatic. And yet he also raises the dead. And he also makes the best wine from the grapes that have suffered the most.
That's the Rutherford quote? In the cellar of affliction is God's choicest wines.
Yep. And it's also just, remember that spiritualization? It's also just literally true. The grapes that suffer the most make the best wine. Okay, the best vintages come out of like an ashy, rough, awful soil. And it's the best whiskeys. I've got a really good whiskey, probably my favorite one that I've had for years, and I still haven't finished it because I drink it so rarely, but it's an Octomore. And I've referred to it on this podcast before. But there's a...
how old?
At this point, I don't remember.
Okay.
But there's a distillery that grows their little patch of their own barley instead of importing barley. Then they use that barley for one collection. And that barley patch one year just was miserable, suffered. And, it was all sorts of wrong. Everything was wrong. And the yield was incredibly low. And they thought they wouldn't even have it that year. And then it made the best ever. Like the absolute best whiskey of all time. When God sends people through the ringer, and he does send people through the ringer, it is by his grace, and if you are in his providence and trusting him, it is to yield an enormously powerful and rich vintage. So there is nobody here on this planet who went through what he sent his own son to go through.
Yeah.
So we are all his children, and he has given many of us very hard roads to walk, and he's given other people pretty easy roads to walk. And the fairly easy, and even the easy roads, if people are on the easy roads, they're still heading towards a death scene. They're still heading towards decay and suffering and mortality and the need for resurrection. Everybody's got it grim. But when you think about the fact that his unfallen son was sent to go through what he went through, including separation from his father and that breach, and then all the hardship,
and all that, and
everything we know about the passion, everything we know about what he went through, and to die young and to die horrifically. It's like that's to die betrayed, tortured, in one of the worst, most horrific deaths you can have, while being assigned enormous guilt that was not his own, and feeling the full wrath of his father for what he did not do. All of that, what happened in the trauma of the crucifixion, dwarfs any trauma any of us have gone through. Mm-hmm. Like it dwarfs it. And that was the road to ultimate glory and to the throne at the right hand of God the Father. So when somebody's had a really hard time, and they've gone through a hard life, to think that, oh no, like I've had it hard and this is haunting me, instead of get your eyes forward, get your eyes on the cross, and focus on trusting God and on the Lord gives and the Lord takes away. Blessed be the name of the Lord. And really like pursuing God to try to please him and to say, okay, these are things I'm supposed to get a return on. Like I have to go.
So not just thinking I'm supposed to survive.
I've survived this. I have to go get a return. These are investments, and I have to go get a return on this. That could be because you're going to be helping others. It could be because you're going to be the world's greatest mom. That could be because you're going to do any number of things. And it's also an opportunity to be a very, very rich vintage, like an incredibly powerful vintage of grace and of the gospel. And if we spend too much time, instead of looking at what we can become and where we're headed and who we're trying to honor, instead we're just looking back and looking back and picking scabs and preventing them from ever healing. And, it's like we can do that. We're very, very capable of doing that.
We just finished, you and my family, track season.
Yeah.
And I'm reminded of when you're suffering in the race and you just settle back into yourself, and instead of getting forward and up, you're watching my son and shouting at him like, get forward, use your arms, like don't just sit in the suck bus.
Yeah.
And it does remind me of the temptation when it really hurts to just settle into the hurt and be like, this is all it'll ever be.
Yep. I had at State, where I was very proud of my athletes and what they were able to achieve, but there's a couple moments that were kind of complete pictures of what it's like. And I had a couple athletes who were, one of whom was my son. They're in the awards tent. They just ran well. They're waiting to get on the podium. They did a great job, and they're puking their guts up in the awards tent and sharing a trash can, and just push themselves to capacity. And in a second, they're going to be up on this podium receiving this honor. But to get there, it's like, well, it's way easier to be where I was sitting, which is I'm sitting in the bleachers looking at the podium, and I'm going to clap. Like I'm going to be one of the ones clap. I didn't go through that. I'm not the one who's receiving that gold medal. I'm the one clapping for the one who's receiving that gold medal. The one who's receiving that gold medal is on his hands and knees, vomiting his guts up, in the awards tent. And that's how the world works.
Yeah.
Like the path to glory is always through suffering. It just is. It just is always through hardship. And that's what creates the rarity, the scarcity. And there are people who get a return from it, and there's people who don't. There's people who are puking their guts up because they had too much to drink. They end up with the same kind of suffering. There's people who ruin their lives chasing pleasure, and there's people who feel every ounce of pain that somebody ruining their life feels, but they get a return on it, and they build something, and they build something for others. So when people who have experienced trauma, real trauma, not manufactured stuff, there's plenty of real trauma in the world, but people who've experienced real trauma, when they focus on living for others and they focus on self-sacrifice instead of self-service, and they stop trying to heal themselves, and they start just putting their eyes forward and asking God to get a return and to turn them into the character they're supposed to be, and to become a powerful life, to become a powerful character in the lives of others. When they start to look away from their own wounds, they become very, very effective people.
Yeah, you touched on this, but she mentions, I think she's referring again to the Reformed, but there are many in our circles who are uncomfortable using terms like trauma and abuse. And I think that's kind of what you're getting at here, is that we're not uncomfortable with talking about it. Or perhaps you're just saying, don't be a scab picker.
Yeah. So I can think about things that plenty of people have gone through. So I could rattle off guy on the guy side, but on the girl side, I could be like, okay, so yeah, that one. Like I can kind of rattle through these stories of these women who are close to us, close friends, and the horrible trauma they have in their past. And none of them are talking about their trauma. And the reason why they're not talking about their trauma isn't because they're scared of that word, but because it has ceased to be traumatic. Because they are eyes front, they're living for other people, and they're honoring God and pursuing the pleasure of God. And they have a strength and they have an endurance that others don't. And they've been through some pretty good hell. And so they're really helpful to other people. They're really great lifeguards and lighthouses and sheepdogs, and St. Bernards. They're these very effective people. I'm thinking of women specifically, very effective moms and friends and women who are not cataloging their trauma. They're not sitting there ticking through, yep, that happened. They're looking at the person in front of them. They're living for that person. And they have become very effective. So it's not that trauma doesn't exist. Trauma exists. And I'm not trying to belittle it or anything like that, but what healing looks like, what real healing looks like, is when that trauma ceases to be traumatic because people are living for people in the present and in the future. And they're sacrificing their lives for others and doing so to honor God. And so when they are learning to live for others, instead of looking in the mirror wondering when they're going to heal, don't worry about that. Give the healing to God and just wonder who you can bless today. Just go out your front door and see what you can do. Now, at a certain level, if you can't do that, if you have enough PTSD that you can't talk to a stranger in public, and there are people who have, it's legitimately terrible. Get into godly counseling. Don't try to, heal thyself. Don't try to do that. Go find a godly pastor, get into pastoral counseling, get into serious biblical counseling. Don't try to go get in the world's therapy industry. Biblical counseling, a godly pastor, get in a church and try to grow stronger. But you can't do that with willpower. You can do that by going to somebody who can help you. If you are capable of helping others, do it.
Yeah.
If you're not capable of helping others because you're just totally incapacitated, you have gnarly PTSD, you've got night terrors, you've got all sorts of things going on, get help. Go get help. If you can help others, realize that will really build up your own muscles and your own capacity.
Do you think there is a danger, a different side of minimizing or not treating other people's abuses? Is that a problem we run into often, or not treating them as serious, or not weeping with those who weep, I guess would be the conversation.
So here's the thing. There's people, sure, that's possible. I mean, That's a possible thing. I do not think that's the problem of our cultural moment. The problem of our cultural moment has been the weaponization of people's trauma to control others, to try to manipulate and steer and control others. It doesn't mean that there's not trauma. But in my experience, stuff my wife went through, stuff that her friends went through, has made her both very sympathetic to people and then wildly unsympathetic to people.
Yeah, interesting.
So,
yeah.
It's sort of like she can talk to somebody and feel for them and really coach them and help them. And she can also sit there and be like, honestly, stand up, stop being such a fusser, move the hell on. It's like she has the ability to really sympathize and also to be completely unsympathetic because she knows she knows what needs to happen. And so when somebody is sitting there wallowing and continues to pick the scab and then complains that the wound is still bleeding, so she can be very unsympathetic, but when somebody is just dealing with something and trying to stand up and trying to look to God and move on, she can be wildly sympathetic. And so I think a big part of it is that people who have experienced trauma often have no idea how many others have as well.
That seems to be really true.
Who appear to them to be fully undamaged.
Yeah.
And they're just fine.
I've heard that about churches sometimes.
Oh, yeah.
They'll be like, everybody here's perfect and has never struggled with anything in their
I am the
life.
only one who was molested as a child. Yeah, right. I am the only one who dealt with rape. I am the only one who dealt with physical abuse from a boyfriend, from a father, from a husband. No, you're not. You really aren't. Now, that doesn't mean it's not real and it's not awful, because it is. But what kind of character are you being? Like, it's you yourself. What kind of character are you being? And then you're projecting around you to a bunch of people who appear undamaged, unharmed, never had to deal with anything. And you're just thinking, I'm the only one that God gave a hard story to. No. And even if your story is harder than every other person in your congregation, it's not harder than the story that Christ lived. It just isn't. And you know that to be the case because one of the things Christ has to do is love you and deal with your crap. So
that's true for all.
That's exactly. So the point is that it's if you're incapable of helping others, get in a pastor's office and do it immediately. Seek biblical help. If you're capable, and if you're a mom, if you're a wife, you need to start building the muscles of self-sacrifice rather than looking in the mirror at your wounds.
Yeah.
And, go get more wounds, but go get more wounds faithfully, laying your life down for other people. That's going to be a much better way to go about it.
What do you think about, it's pretty trendy. I'm, again, not working off the question now, but moving on to other applications. What do you think about the idea of describing certain people as unhealthy people that you need to cut yourself off from? That's a very, very common trend in current psychology. What do you think about that?
Absolutely. It's just which people.
Okay.
So
you don't think that obviously it can be taken the wrong way, but you're thinking as far as the desire to separate from somebody who's wanting to harm you.
Whenever I have no, forget that. It's more like you should always, the Bible talks about it. You should always be willing to cut off relationships. It's a question of which relationships, why.
Okay.
It's not about like, I need to draw boundaries because these people
are
so
it's not about yourself again.
Yeah. It's not, it just isn't. It can be about yourself, meaning when I'm with them, I give in to temptation and I no longer please God or honor God. It's like, whenever I get coffee with that friend, I end up gossiping for an hour about other people, then I feel bad. It's like whenever I hang out with that guy, I end up joking sexually about women and I shouldn't do that. So I'm just not going to hang out with them anymore. Like that's just fleeing temptation. But instead of thinking of it as self-preservation, think of it as temptation. Do you flee temptation or not? Yes. When you have certain relationships that actually take advantage of your weaknesses, when you have friends who have the exact same weaknesses that you do, and you don't check each other, that's not good. So flee temptation. But as far as like when I'm with that person, what?
Yeah. They're unkind.
They talk about things I don't want to talk about. Well, you don't have to hang out with them unless it's your brother, unless it's your, it's family. Then
okay, so
honestly,
what if it
just
is
deal
family?
with it.
Okay.
Like, I hate the way he talks about fill in the blank. I don't want to talk about tariffs or immigration. I hate talking about politics. He only talks about politics. So what? Toughen up. You'll be fine. It's like, go deal with it.
It does seem like, especially in here, this seems more a problem with women's relationships than men's, but women really struggle with the direct, I don't want to talk about this to each other. And that can feel like, it seems like that's where a lot of the challenges
So if you think of it as fleeing temptation, if you're fleeing temptation and you are trying to position yourself in different relationships in which you will do a better job honoring God, great. If you're thinking about, I'm trying to protect myself and preserve myself, and I'm using this to weaponize not having to be around other members of Christ's body who happen to irritate me or annoy me, that's a problem. So are you fleeing temptation, or are you just being a selfish little queen? I've seen both.
Yeah.
I've advised people to cut off relationships before, but I've advised people to cut off relationships when those relationships were the kind of relationships that get you into genuine trouble with God. Don't do that. So, I have some girl who's got a friend who's really immodest, aggressively immodest, constantly talking, about guys and trying to, provoke desire in guys and et cetera and so on. That's just, and then some follower hangs out with her and ends up going down the same road. Like, no, stop, cut it off, move on. Don't be in that relationship. But usually now in therapy speak, it's people who are just not affirming you. So you want to be only around people who are affirming you. It's like, no.
Yeah.
You really don't want that. You would like people who will challenge you faithfully. But just, are you self-sacrificial or are you self-serving? Easy question. If you're being self-sacrificial, you're probably in a good relationship. If you're being self-serving, it's bad. And if you're trying to witness to somebody, but you're too weak and you end up being affected instead of affecting, then move on. Leave that ministry to somebody stronger.
And again, this is funny because in the fiction world, it seems like you try to stuff as much bad stuff as you can into your characters' lives.
Yes.
Which is funny when you're thinking about real life. We're trying to mitigate. Seems like we're trying to mitigate bad stuff. In fiction, you're trying to pump it all the way up.
Yep. And then in coaching, I'm trying to synthetically and artificially pump it all the way up too.
Okay.
We
talked about that with parenting, right? You're saying you don't want your life to be easy, your kid's life to be easy. That is not the goal.
Yeah, at all. Not even a little bit. And I love sports because while they don't make you a better person, they do give you the opportunity to become a better person. It presents you with physical challenges and opportunities for growth in many ways. Also opportunities to continue being just as awful as you always have been, but just now plugged into an amplifier.
Sure, that's
an amplifier of desire and competitiveness. But I love sports and I like track because of its simplicity. But we live such blessed lives that my kids don't have to get up before dawn to go milk the goats. My son is not in the fields fighting lions to save our livelihood, to protect our livestock. We just don't lead those lives. If we did, we wouldn't have to then take teenagers to an oval and make them run around it till they throw up. Sure. It's like there's a kind of hardship that my grandfather lived. And when he describes, like, holy cow, when I think about what he did, his older brother was off on a destroyer in World War II. His dad was trying to make ends meet, plowing victory gardens in Nebraska. He had a big stallion that fought him and he had a heart attack. I think my grandfather was 15 at the time. I could be getting that age wrong. So his dad has a heart attack, survives, but is bedridden. His older brother's at war. And in his words, every single thing on the farm was pregnant, his mom included. And so, like the cow, the pig, it was just crazy. So before school, he would get up and go work all of his dad's odd jobs. Now, these odd jobs were things like cutting the weeds around the Union Pacific Railroad. Like his dad had a contract with the railroad to keep the rail line cut. He's going to lose that job immediately if he couldn't do it. They don't care if you had a heart attack or not. So he's, harnessing up the horse and doing a horse pulled mow on the railroad track and going around and doing all these other jobs, going to school. Then he goes to school. And then after school, he said he always fought. So he had a fight right after school virtually every day. Rolling in the street in a fist fight. And then
what about?
He said in his words, he always got chose.
He got chose.
He's like, in their language, he always got chose. Somebody wanted to come at him. And so he got chose almost every day. I mean, I'm sure it was not literally every day, but it felt like every day.
I mean, you wouldn't have to have too many for it to feel like a lot of fist fights.
So he's in a lot of fist fights. He's in fights after school every day. He's doing all his dad's jobs in the morning before school, going to school, then has a fist fight, and then goes off to the Omaha stockyards and loads thousands of cattle onto trains to heading to Chicago every single night. And he said he cheated in his really tender conscience. He told me that he cheated in science because he got a magazine about the stars. And between loads of cattle, he learned the stars at the Omaha stockyards. And then he would get home really late, pass out, get up in the morning, do his dad's jobs, and go through it again. And then be like loading thousands of steers onto trains every night after his fist fight. It's like, and so I look at that and I'm just like, did that guy really need to run track? Like, no, he did not.
Yeah.
Did he need to do what my sons have needed to do? No, he did not.
It's interesting. We've turned all this into a quest for emotional health,
right.
But it seems like emotional health is caused by being thankful and working really hard.
Gratitude. And I like the slogan of Logos, which is just gratitude, sacrifice, excellence. Yeah. It's like gratitude, sacrifice, really important. Sacrifice of what? Of yourself, of your pleasure.
And sometimes God,
of your comfort.
Especially with health stuff, God decides to make your sacrifice different from what you were planning to have your sacrifice be.
And some people, like my grandfather's a big, strong guy. And so he was working himself to the bone for his family. Other people, their sacrifices, they have to deal with chronic health issues and remain cheerful. And their sacrifices, they have got to be good weather for people around them, even though they're constantly tempted to be bad weather. They're under this constant temptation to just rain and drip. And their sacrifice is to be grateful for what God's given them and to look past their own pain and discomfort and to focus entirely on being sunshine, on being bright spring weather for people around them. And that's hard. Like, that can be hard. So my grandfather's this big guy. He went off to row for the Naval Academy. And, it's like he did a lot more sacrificial stuff in his life. But God demanded certain things of him. And God demands certain things of all of us. So when I had my brain tumor, it's like, okay, so what do I need to do here? What am I called to do? Am I called to feel sorry for myself? Am I called to be a drama queen about this? Like, what am I called to do with this brain tumor? And how do I fulfill the role of that character effectively in the lives of my children and people around me and so on? You have to focus on that. But sometimes it's a character journey of weakness. Like, I'm being debilitated. I've got a chronic whatever problem. I actually don't get to be the big, strong guy who goes, and I'd love to be the guy who loads the stockyards and I'm so tough and I'm so strong. Actually, sometimes you have to lay that down and not care about being the big, strong guy, but you still have to be a great character in the lives around you through whatever you're walking, whatever you're carrying, whatever your journey might be. You still have to be a faithful character in lives around you and focus on self-sacrifice, not self-service. And as long as it's that discussion with yourself, where is the sacrifice, where is the service, then you're going to be fine.
It's a good spot to end.
There we go. Go load them stockyards. Actually, you don't load the stockyards. Load the trains in the stockyards. Peace.
Lay your life down. Your heartbeats cannot be hoarded. Your reservoir of breaths is draining away. You have hands, blister them while you can. You have bones, make them strain. They can carry nothing in the grave. You have lungs, let them spill with laughter. With an average life expectancy of 78.2 years in the U.S., subtracting 8 hours a day for sleep, I have around 250,000 conscious hours remaining to me in which I could be smiling or scowling, rejoicing in my life in this race, in this story, or moaning and complaining about my troubles. I can be giving my fingers, my back, my mind, my words, my breaths to my wife and my children and my neighbors. Or I can grasp after the vapor and the vanity for myself, dragging my feet, afraid to die, and therefore afraid to live. And like Adam, I will still die in the end.